All right, and it looks like we are live. Welcome back, everybody. It is Thursday. Welcome back to our Thursday edition of Table Talk, where we are reading through currently the Jesus Storybook Bible for children, but also for families. We are seeing through this book. We're learning each week about how the Bible isn't simply a story about various disconnected characters and their stories, but actually one complete story from beginning to end, with one very important main character, one hero, which is, of course, Jesus. We have been reading through this book for quite a while now. In fact, if you can believe it, we are 150 pages through this book already. It's quite a big book, quite a thick book, so we are making lots and lots of progress, and we are going to keep on making that progress here today. Let's get the camera moved on down, and we are going to get moving with our reading today. We are beginning with a story about a boy named Daniel. This is called Daniel and the Scary Sleepover. I bet some of you might know where we're going with this. Get things all lined up. Perfect. Things were not looking good for God's people. They had been captured and taken far from home, and now they were slaves of the king of Babylon. But God had not left his people. He was with them, and he was looking after them. Daniel loved God and obeyed him. Now, God made Daniel able to understand lots of difficult things. So it wasn't long before the king of Babylon noticed him. King Darius liked how clever Daniel was, so he made Daniel his most important helper of all, and put him in charge of lots and lots of other helpers. But the other helpers didn't like this. They wanted the king to like them best. They wanted to get rid of Daniel. So they spied on Daniel. They tried to find things wrong with Daniel, things they could tell the king, things they could, but there weren't any. None. They couldn't find anything at all. Except there was just one thing. Every day, 3 times a day, without fail, no matter what, Daniel went to his room, closed the door, and prayed. They smiled to themselves. "Let's get the king to make a law," they said. "No one is allowed to pray to anyone except to the king. Daniel won't obey this law, and he will be punished." They were pleased with themselves for being so clever, and hurried off to tell the king. The king liked their idea, but he didn't know that they were tricking him. So he made it into a law. "Everyone must pray only to me. If you don't, the lions will have you for their dinner." Daniel heard this. He knew it was wrong to pray to anyone except God. He had to do what God said, whatever it cost him, even if it meant that he would die. So Daniel went to his room, closed the door, and prayed. That's just what the bad men knew Daniel would do. They skipped straight off to tell the king, "Oh, your most glittering highness, your law says, does it not, that everyone must pray to you alone, sire?" "Yes," said the king. "Oh, magisterial brightness, then correct us if we're wrong, but it would seem that Daniel is praying to God and not to you." The king was sad. He had been tricked. He didn't want to hurt Daniel, but he also couldn't change his law. And so he let the soldiers throw Daniel to the lions. "May your God, who loves you so much, rescue you," the king said. The king went back to his palace, but he didn't sleep that night, not a wink. He tossed and turned until finally, at the first glimmer of dawn, he leaped out of bed and ran straight to the den. "Daniel," he cried, "has your God rescued you?" "Yes," Daniel shouted. "God sent an angel to close the lions' mouths." And there, resting his head on Daniel's lap, was the biggest lion, purring like a little kitten. The king brought Daniel out of the den. "Look," he said, "Daniel doesn't even have a scratch." The king made a new law. Daniel's God is the true God, the God who rescues. Pray to him instead. God would keep on rescuing his people. And the time was coming when God would send another brave hero like Daniel who would love God and do what God said, whatever it cost him, even if it meant he would die. Together they would pull off the greatest rescue the world has ever known. Here we have our next chapter, which is called God's Messenger. A story about Jonah and the big fish. I know this is one that we know quite well, I think, here at this church. God had a job for Jonah, but Jonah didn't want it. "Go to Nineveh," God said, "and tell your worst enemies that I love them." "No," said Jonah, "those are bad people doing bad things." "Exactly," said God. "They have run far away from me, but I can't stop loving them. I will give them a new start. I will forgive them." "No," said Jonah, "they don't deserve it." "I'll run away," Jonah said to himself, "far away, so far away that God won't be able to find me. Then I won't have to do what God says." "It's a good plan," he said to himself, because as far as he knew, it was a good plan. But of course it wasn't such a good plan at all. It was a silly plan, because you can run away from God, but he will always come and find you. Jonah went ahead with his not very good plan. "One ticket to not Nineveh, please," he said, and boarded a boat, sailing in the very opposite direction of Nineveh. Well, it wasn't long before a fierce wind blew. The boat started to lurch and pitch and roll, and everyone started turning green. Jonah sat bolt upright in his bed. You see, the first thing that went wrong with Jonah's not very good plan was that God sent a big storm after him. The sailors couldn't sail their ship properly. "We're sinking," they screamed, and started throwing everything overboard: suitcases, food, whatever they could find. By now Jonah knew that the storm was his fault. "Throw me in instead," he shouted to the sailors, "and the storm will stop." The sailors weren't sure. "It's the only way you can be saved," Jonah cried. And so, 1, 2, 3, splash. No sooner had Jonah hit the water than the waves grew calm, the wind died down, and the storm stopped. Just then, when Jonah thought it was all over, when he was sure he was going to drown, God sent a big fish to rescue him. The fish swallowed Jonah whole with one big gulp. Jonah must have thought he'd died. It was so dark in there, like in a tomb. But then he smelled the rotting food and felt the slimy seaweed and knew that he wasn't dead. He was in the belly of the fish. Sitting there in the darkness for 3 whole days, Jonah had plenty of time to think. Pretty soon he realized his plan was, well, a very, very silly plan indeed. He was sorry for running away. He prayed to God from inside the great fish and asked God to forgive him. After 3 days, the fish spat Jonah safely out onto a sandy beach. Just then Jonah heard someone calling his name. "Go to Nineveh," God said. And this time, Jonah said, "Yes." He went straight to Nineveh and told everyone God's wonderful message. And this is what he said. Even though you've run far from God, He can't stop loving you. Run to Him so He can forgive you. The people of Nineveh listened to Jonah, and they started loving God. They learned to do what God said and to stop running away from Him, just like Jonah. Many years later, God was going to send another messenger with the same wonderful message. Like Jonah, he would spend 3 days in utter darkness. But this messenger would be God's own Son. He would be called the Word, because he himself would be God's message. God's message translated into our own language. Everything God wanted to say to the whole world in a person. Here's our third chapter for this Thursday. This one is called Get Ready. God's people return from being slaves. Have you ever been to a party that lasted a whole week? How about a sermon that went on all day? Well, that's what happened to God's people after they came home from being slaves. They had forgotten how God wanted them to live, or who they were supposed to be. So Ezra and Nehemiah read them the rules that God had given to Moses. But something odd happened. The more the sermon went on, the sadder they all got. Why? Was the sermon that boring? No, not really. It was strange, you see. As Ezra read the book of rules, it worked like a mirror. It showed them what they were like, and they didn't like what they saw. They saw that they had not been living the way they should. They saw that they were cruel and selfish. "We've blown it," they cried. "Now God will punish us." They thought they knew what God was going to do, but they didn't. Of course, they might have picked up a clue from Ezra's name, which means help is here, and an even stronger one from Nehemiah's name, because his name means God wipes away our tears. And that, as you'll see, is exactly what God was getting ready to do. Ezra looked at God's children. Great hot tears were welling up in their eyes and streaming down their cheeks. He stopped his sermon mid-sentence and shut the book. "We're having a party," he shouted. And so that's just what they did all week long. God wants us to be happy, Ezra said. All day they listened to stories about the wonderful things God had done for his people, how he made the world, how he gave a special promise to Abraham, how he rescued them from slavery, how he spoke to Moses and showed them how to live, how he brought them to a special land, how he rescued them no matter what, time after time, over and over again, because of his never stopping, never giving up, unbreaking, always and forever love. They remembered how God had always, all through the years, been loving to his children, keeping his promise to Abraham taking care of them, forgiving them, even when they disobeyed, even when they ran away from him, even when they thought they didn't need him. Then God told his children something more. I can't stop loving you. You are my heart's treasure. But I lost you, and now I am coming back for you. I am like the sun that gently shines on you, chasing away the darkness and fear and death. You'll be so happy. You'll be like little calves running free in an open field. I'm going to send my messenger, the promised one, the one you have been waiting for, the rescuer. He is coming, so get ready. It had taken centuries for God's people to be ready, but now the time had almost come for the best part of God's plan. God himself was going to come, not to punish his people, but to rescue them. God was getting ready to wipe away every tear from every eye, and the true party was just about to begin. I think we have one more in us. I think with our timing, yeah, I believe we can do one more. This one is called He's Here, the Nativity from Luke 1 and 2. Everything was ready. The moment God had been waiting for was here at last. God was coming to help his people just as he had promised in the beginning. But how would he come? What would he be like? What would he do? Mountains would have bowed down, seas would have roared, trees would have clapped their hands, but the earth held its breath. As silent as snow falling, he came in, and when no one was looking, in the darkness, he came. There was a young girl who was engaged to a man named Joseph. Joseph was the great-great-great-great-grandson of King David. One morning this girl was minding her own business when suddenly a great warrior of light appeared right there in her bedroom. He was Gabriel, and he was an angel, a special messenger from heaven. When she saw the tall, shining man standing there, Mary was frightened. "You don't need to be scared," Gabriel said. "God is very happy with you." Mary looked around to see if perhaps he was talking to someone else. "Mary," Gabriel said, and he laughed with such gladness that Mary's eyes filled with sudden tears. "Mary, you're going to have a baby, a little boy. You will call him Jesus. He is God's own son. He's the one. He's the rescuer. The God who flung planets into space and kept them whirling around and around. The God who made the universe with just a word. The one who could do anything at all was making himself small and coming down as a baby." Wait, God was sending a baby to rescue the world? "But it's too wonderful," Mary said, and felt her heart beating hard. "How can it be true?" "Is anything too wonderful for God?" Gabriel asked. So Mary trusted God more than what her eyes could see, and she believed. "I am God's servant," she said. "Whatever God says, I will do." Sure enough, it was just as the angel had said. 9 months later, Mary was almost ready to have her baby. Now Mary and Joseph had to take a trip to Bethlehem, the town King David was from. But when they reached the little town, they found every room was full. Every bed was taken. "Go away," the innkeepers told them. "There isn't any place for you." Where would they stay? Soon Mary's baby would come. They couldn't find anywhere except an old, tumble-down stable. So they stayed where the cows and the donkeys and the horses stayed. And there, in the stable, amongst the chickens and the donkeys and the cows, In the quiet of the night, God gave the world his wonderful gift. The baby that would change the world was born, his baby son. Mary and Joseph wrapped him up to keep him warm. They made a soft bed of straw and used the animal's feeding trough as his cradle. They gazed in wonder at God's great gift, wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger. Mary and Joseph named him Jesus, Emmanuel, which means God has come to live with us, because, of course, he had. And that is where we are going to leave off for this week. All right. We made quite a lot of progress in the biblical story this week. I hope you all enjoyed. Thank you for joining us. If you're here with us live this afternoon, thanks for being here. If you're watching sometime in the future, I do hope that you enjoy as well. Do, of course, tune in tomorrow at the same time for our Friday Table Talk. And if you haven't already and you would like to attend Sunday morning service this Sunday, please be sure to register for that and to watch the video that we've produced to help you understand what things will look like now that we are reopening after being closed down for so long. We do hope to see many of you in person on Sunday, but of course our live streams will still be going. If you would like a copy of this book, as always, please do let me know. I do still have copies of that if you'd like to have one for your family. And until next time, I hope you all have a wonderful day and a wonderful rest of your week. Bye now.